societally, how do we respond to a changing culture that is going to be impacted by AI?
This is where like the Old Testament in particular is just really underrated in helping us navigate those questions.
If God is big enough, then our concerns will not override us. We're not gonna stop sleeping at night because we know that God is on his throne. His sovereign power is still reigning and ruling over all things, and we are here to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to kind of theologically engaging with some of this stuff, but always with that perspective that God is always gonna win.
Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? Thanks for joining us today. My name is Andrew Noble. We are a podcast that helps Christians use tech how Jesus would if he were to live today. Before we get into today's episode, two very quick announcements. First off, we have an end of year listener feedback survey. It's all right there in the title, listener feedback survey. We'd love to hear what you like, what you don't like, how we can improve in the podcast, what you think we should focus on next year. So head to our website, whatwouldjesustech.com, or you can click the link in the show description. Also, just one more quick thing that we are going to have a brief pause in the schedule over Christmas as Joel and I spend time with our families, but we will pick back up the episodes in January. We might even go to weekly. So give us some feedback in the listener survey if you have more ideas there. So now to today's episode. I went to ChatGPT. I said, give me a good description for, an intro to the podcast. They gave me something. I didn't like it. At the end of the day, we need to make sense of this AI progression, this future that we are experiencing now. And so I brought in a couple people that are in the midst of figuring this out. Dave Betts. He's been writing quite extensively on AI. He's got a British accent, so you'll be able to distinguish him a little bit. Church and AI is his Substack. He's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the lead elder at Trinity Church. So some people, do they refer to you as pastor? Because, elder and pastor are synonymous in scripture. Do you call yourself a pastor? Does that make sense?
I'm a lead elder who functions as a pastor, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's semantics, really. Essentially a senior pastor.
Totally. Anyway, so you got your MDiv, you're in the midst of writing on this. Do you use ChatGPT to help you write at this point, Dave?
I do use ChatGPT. I can't even say it now. ChatGPT. I use it a fair amount, but not usually for the things that people think of. It's usually for idea generation and often to check kind of my logical reasoning and stuff like that. I wouldn't use it just to, give me a paper or to write, something for me, because it's usually not great at this point. But yeah.
Fair enough. Also joining me is Austin Gravely, and I was able to meet him in person at the Gospel Coalition conference just a few months ago, which was great. He is a very friendly guy, despite being a guy with a very big beard. And so I appreciated getting to know him. He gave me a hug right away, which was just great. Austin, social media manager at the Gospel Coalition. He also had a podcast, Digital Babylon, and it focused on that in terms of his writing. Austin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. It's good to get to see you again.
Yeah. Do you use AI or ChatGPT specifically in the midst of writing for the Gospel Coalition?
No, we don't. I personally don't use ChatGPT in the course of work. I do use ChatGPT kind of along the lines of what Dave said for idea generation, and for just if I'm stuck in a line of thought and I need to break that log jam, I'll throw it into ChatGPT and see if it gives me something to move the ball forward. But no, as far as my immediate work, no, I don't use ChatGPT as much. But if you do any kind of social media work, AI is everywhere. You can't do your job without it.
Right. Cool. Yeah. And that's what Joel's been telling me. Joel is my co-host. Joel, let's jump right into the OpenAI stuff. So I think a lot of people will have heard about Sam Altman, the CEO, fired, rehired back into the board. We're recording this episode December 4th. A lot has happened in the last 4 weeks. Bring us up to speed, Joel. How would you break down what has happened and why he was fired in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to even be talking about this because it was almost a year ago that ChatGPT was actually released. A little bit more, actually. And that's where Sam Altman and the whole OpenAI team was catapulted into preeminence in like people's minds when they think about AI. He was like kind of the figurehead of AI when people start thinking about this technology. He appeared before Congress. So there's a lot riding on the character of Sam Altman. And he, a little bit relevant background, he was at YC, Y Combinator, which is a venture fund that helps startups get off the ground. And he was kind of a figurehead there before he moved on to OpenAI. And he was involved with Musk, who kind of started OpenAI to say like, hey, we need to make AI open because of how powerful it is. It's this whole argument of like, if you give one person a gun, they become extremely powerful over everyone else. So why don't we give everyone guns so they can defend themselves? And we have this sort of democratic capability. The same level of concern is there with OpenAI. So anyways, cutting to the chase, the board at this point a month ago was around 6 people. There was Sam Altman, CEO, Mira Murati, who's CTO, Ilya, who is their chief scientific officer, Greg, who is their, I believe, president, and then 2 others that I think are not like actively involved in the day-to-day operations, but are on the board. And it turns out, and actually all the details haven't been publicly shared yet because there's a lot of confusion, but it turns out there was some sort of disconnect internally, and this 3-3 tie on ousting Sam Altman flipped into 4-2. And with that, he was said, hey, we're removing you from the board. Officially, it's because you've done things that haven't been transparent with the board. And, people start speculating, oh, is he trying to do side deals? What is it? But then, the whole Twitter world was really trying to tease anything out of it. There was like Twitter spaces people were jumping into to say that it is a fight between colloquially the decelerationist and the accelerationist, which is kind of 2 camps of like, hey, let's move AI forward faster, or hey, AI is really scary, let's like slow it down.
Mm-hmm.
And
because there's like a Q hypothesis. So if you did an MDiv, you heard about a Q hypothesis of the source behind the Gospels. We're not talking about that Q hypothesis. There's a new Q hypothesis of some sort of super intelligence, a super AI, maybe even AGI. And so maybe it's related to that. I was seeing some rumors around that. But
Yeah.
Kind of rumors.
But not the character Q from Star Trek: The Next Generation, the super genius demigod type character. This is something different.
No, yeah, like typically, so Q star, and to like be very brief on it, in ChatGPT and a lot of these large language models that are really language focused, they are often bad at math. They can't do math. So the belief is that, hey, they've had this breakthrough, which might have been put on someone's desk, like Ilya, and said, hey, we can now start doing math, complex math with this other model that we can start putting in parallel with the language model. And if you think about your brain, it's like, hey, yeah, you have like a left brain and a right brain. You have the vision center. You have all these different parts. So in creating a mind, the next artificial mind, you can now overlay multiple models and have them work together. So we get closer to, oh my gosh, are we getting to this artificial general intelligence, which is AGI, which right now we're in artificial narrow intelligence, which is like, hey, we can only do a few things, but we can do them better than humans can. Like what ChatGPT does really fast is put things together.
Right.
So, yeah.
Or chess, chess can be human.
Yeah, chess, AlphaGo.
But it's not general because it's not an intelligence that can do a wide variety of tasks. That's the difference there between general and narrow. Yeah.
Okay. So that's basically the summary. Is like Ilya, I think, had been a big figurehead in like saying like, we want to get to AGI, and kind of communicating that like it is this big thing that people are underestimating. But also at the same time, it seems like he got to a point where he's like, no, we need to slow down. And that was where the schism had started.
Mm-hmm. And Ilya, is he the guy that's gets people chanting, feel the AGI?
I think so. I think it's also like an internal OpenAI thing. And I think just tangent, this whole like accelerationist group of people, Like if I wasn't Christian, I probably would be in this accelerationist camp, which is like this belief. I know you're like really puzzled when I said that, but it's this belief of like, oh my gosh, we have this power in technology that could really change how society is. And if we can achieve that, like, for example, if we all had personal robots that walked around and could do our laundry and take care of us, that could like solve a lot of problems. So it's like people who look for that in solving problems, but obviously this is in the absence of a theology of who God is and like how that plays into things. So
Good.
Yeah.
Dave and Austin, you guys are keeping up to date on different pieces of news, and yet it seems impossible to keep up on the AI news. What are any pieces of information that you've learned about AI over the past few months that you think would be helpful to set the stage for what listeners might want to know or need to know about AI developments?
Yeah, I think for me, like you say, it's hard to keep on top of everything. I described it the other day as feels like kind of climbing up a waterfall. It's just impossible. You know, there's so much information. I think my big concern is probably an overstatement, but one of the things that I'm really narrowed in on at the moment is any kind of discontent with this kind of technology is concerning. You know, it's concerning if you've got people going in different directions, especially with something like ChatGPT that has catapulted its way forward. I think the big thing I'm keeping my eye on really is this like battle between various countries and how that plays out, you know, because really there's an arms race for AI. And at the moment, it's not an issue. You know, of course it's not. We're talking about things that can, you know, answer basic questions. We're talking about large language models, but as things progress, I think that's what I'm keeping my eye on is how OpenAI and, you know, Google, like I was just looking at Google's Gemini AI, which looks potentially to be kind of a ChatGPT killer. How that combines with Sam Altman and what's going on in China. There's just all these pieces of this puzzle that I'm trying to kind of keep a zoomed out look at without really knowing exactly what that's going to look like. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen any of that, whether, Joel, you have any thoughts on that at all either.
Well, and just to clarify too, I'd be interested, who are the players in the race? So there's OpenAI, nonprofit, overseeing ChatGPT. Then you have Google overseeing Gemini. Who are the others in the race?
I mean, I'll jump in and say, Microsoft, who's the other big tech? You have Facebook, who has Llama. I think, Amazon. If you're looking at every big company, even like not big tech companies, you're like, well, what are we doing with AI? You know, we got to do something. So it's really this arms race, and it like highlights the whole Thucydides trap, which is like the whole America versus China thing, where it's like everyone knows we're like stepping forward towards this confrontation, but you can't really like step away from it. So you just like keep going forward, because if you step away, you're seceding to their dominance, right? And the tangentially on that, like it's good that like President Xi came and said, hey, we don't want war. And I think that was a good step to like kind of soften this kind of new Cold War we're in. But it is interesting because on the AI front, it's something where you see like the EU, for example, is heavily like, hey, let's regulate everything. But then that ends up being where a country like the US, who is more libertarian, will have these innovations come. And if you look at like the big technology stack players, most of them are in the US. And even if you look at, there's a software layer, there's also hardware. It's like, hey, NVIDIA is a hardware company that builds these GPUs that the software runs on. Okay, now we're going to ban exports to China. So it's like there really is this whole like arms race.
Did that happen?
Yeah.
NVIDIA didn't. Yeah. And then
President Biden, I believe it's still banned. So, if you're looking at the size of the chips, there's like nanometers, right? So there's like, 5 nanometers, 4 nanometers, and the smaller you can go, the more compute you can do and more efficient it is. China doesn't have some of these foundries in house. Taiwan does. Taiwan's with TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor is like the leader. And that plays into they want to get that. And by blocking them, it kind of slows their technology for everything, for weapons, AI, all that type of stuff. So there's, I guess, like a lot of this stuff, you may be, like you said, it's a waterfall of knowledge. And if you're not in it day to day, you won't even know that this Cold War is playing out and we did this ban and stuff like that.
Well, I think one of the challenges with this whole conversation is you get people like NVIDIA and the CEO of NVIDIA saying, we're going to achieve super intelligence within 5 years, and then you've got other people saying, well, hang on, your job is to sell these chips. So it makes sense to really promote that. And then you've got other companies saying, no, there's no way. And partly that's because they're behind in the race. And so it's hard to even distinguish between all the noise, what is actually going on, for people like us, who are not kind of right up there in the field,
Yeah. And there's a lot of newer players. Anthropic is a big one. So these are other companies that aren't part of big tech, but they've been a little bit ahead in AI. And then
Elon Musk is trying to do his own
thing
too.
XAI with Grok. Yeah. So I think you probably list off, a whole battery of companies that are in it. And then there's even like within just this world of AI, there's like, how does the AI run? So if you're talking to, and this is kind of related to what I'm working on at Splunk, where it's like, if you're talking to companies about how they implement AI to actually do a job better or do something more efficiently, they're like, hey, we got this like big cloud bill from OpenAI because it costs a lot to do it on the cloud. So it's like, okay, how do you run that on the edge? Like, for example, Tesla, when they're trying to do autonomous self-driving, you're not going to say, hey, there's something in my camera view. I'm going to send it to the cloud and then process it and then come back. You got to do it on the edge. So there's this whole concept. The edge is basically like in the local environment where the actual inference is happening. So like the car or your smartphone where Apple says, hey, we're going to run Siri on your phone for privacy reasons and stuff like that. So that's like edge computing versus cloud computing is a big data center in some building somewhere. Right. Yeah. So that's a whole concept of like, okay, now NVIDIA has these supercomputer data centers. And you may not always want to process data there. You might want to take that and put it on your phone, but it doesn't have the same compute. So how do you do it? Okay, you have to do like some certain like optimizations that makes it less accurate, but now it can run with you. So there's like multiple chapters of like innovation in AI that different people are playing in. And that's probably what contributes to this feeling of like, oh my gosh, we can never keep up. A few years ago, I mentioned to a pastor, I was like, what if we put AI for the sound mixing station in our church? Because we get like feedback and it's like, that's just a person trying to listen to the feedback. But what if you ran an agent that listened to the feedback and then like automatically turned down the gain? And he was like, I mean, that sounds interesting. I have no idea about this, but that sounds cool. And I was just realizing like, yeah, like I'm probably one of few who are actually thinking like, if you put this technology into the Christian world, what happens? Or even like in our society, how do we as Christians live in this new world? And that's what's consuming me a lot these days, these type of thoughts.
That's good.
Cool. Austin, I think we should kind of start to transition the conversation into how do Christians navigate it? I feel like there's two ways that we could go. One is the more almost philosophical acceleration versus deceleration. Should we put a pause on AI developments because of the existential risk, and the progress? And there's like this kind of big conversation about the future and how much should we trust technology to solve our problems. We have a lot of problems, and that feels almost philosophical, but it's grounded in how good the tech is today. And then there's a more like day-to-day practical, what are the ethics of using this? How should Christians use it? How should a social media manager use it or not use it? And just some of that. So I don't know which, I'll leave it to you. Which direction do you want to go, Austin?
Gosh, it's hard because I could go in both directions because I live in both directions. I'm not only just the social media manager for the Gospel Coalition, but I'm also an associate youth minister at my church. And so every week I'm working with students in my area. And at the philosophical level, what we talk about when we say, should we accelerate? Should we decelerate? It's an interesting idea to discuss, but at the end of the day, these companies and these organizations are going to do what they want. And if we say, we should do this, well, even if some decide, hey, we're going to decelerate, if some decide to continue accelerating, then the needle is still moving forward and the ball is being moved down the field. AI's dangers are potentially being developed and being realized. And so it's a good conversation to have about what should we do. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of what is being done or what can be done, there's very little we could do to actually change the state of development of AI. But on the practical end of things, you now have the question of like, okay, so my son, hypothetical, my son has a writing assignment. Should he be allowed to use ChatGPT for his high school writing assignment? And that's downstream from a lot of other discipleship issues that I don't think have ever been fully addressed. The tagline for the podcast that I've done on this subject has been that media literacy is the biggest gaping hole in our discipleship. And as a youth minister, that's not just a problem with our teenagers. It's not just a Gen Z issue. That is an issue that goes all the way up the generational chain. It's a multi-generational failure of discipleship. And so if you're just now getting concerned with the practical implications of AI, well, that's downstream from a bunch of ethical decisions regarding media and technology that you've already made and have been making for some time. And if you're not willing to kind of go underneath the surface of what you think about AI, you're coming into this kind of handicapped. If you have a problem with ChatGPT potentially writing essays, well, okay, that's fine. That I think there's a good conversation to be had about that. But at the same time, if you have a problem with that, do you have a problem with all of the other AI systems that are in your life that you can't see? Something like ChatGPT is just 10% of an iceberg above the surface of the water. Underneath the water, 80-90% of that iceberg, you can't see it. And the same is with AI. Like the question of what you think about AI at the practical level is much bigger and broader than whether you let your child use it as a tool for writing an essay. But if that's the first time you're thinking about discipleship and the practical ethical questions surrounding AI, you're going to have a really hard time, because there's a lot of work that you needed to do for other things leading up to AI to really inform how you should respond to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dave, you've kind of written on this lack of asking the questions we need to ask. I'll quote you back to yourself. I fear the church in general is choosing collectively to see AI as a novelty and not an agent for utterly changing how we live, work, and minister in the world. There are important questions to answer that go far beyond, can ChatGPT write my sermon illustration for me? End quote. So like, what are the questions that we should be asking that, to Austin's point, go beneath the surface of the iceberg?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of preface this by saying that I think there are some existential questions to ask, but I think even that, we need to go way before that. We're not, before we get to this, like, is AI going to, take over the world, which is often where people go. I think we need to talk about, okay, how is AI going to change our culture? How's it going to change our society? How's it going to change the way our world looks? How's it going to change our economics? I mean, there are all sorts of predictions that, who is it? Nick Bostrom, he's got this book called Superintelligence, and he predicts that it could really, realistically get us to a place where I love the phrase he uses. It says, could make us rich beyond the dreams of avarice, or something like that, because as productivity, the cost of production drastically decreases, you suddenly have cases for things like universal basic income, because there's all this extra income. Now, I know that's probably going to trigger a whole bunch of people. I understand that, but I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a reality. And so what do we do with our theology of helping the poor if there are no poor, hypothetically? Now, I think even before that, we've got questions around things like, we've talked about a little bit about kind of digital media and how disastrous that's been for generations, that kind of media literacy. And studies now are kind of fairly clear that has not been helpful for young people. I don't know about you guys. I was one of the privileged few who, social media really got big just as I was finishing high school. And so I kind of just scraped by some of that. But I think that as we see some of the damaging consequences, what AI is going to do is make it worse. It's going to take those bad things and make it worse. I think we've got issues like, deep fakes, fake news, disinformation, just this, sometimes referred to as an information apocalypse. There's just so much information coming at you at all times. Suddenly trust in society will diminish even more. And we could, this is another conversation, but there are things like, the horrific effects of dating apps, or, spending your life online and not having real meaningful connections. I think all of that to say, I think our conversation should start around, okay, what does it mean for us as a church with some of these potential changes coming, to be able to provide, meaningful connection, to be able to recognize some of the changes happening in society, not just with AI. AI, we can talk about how we can incorporate AI, and I'd love to talk with Joel about some of that stuff. Especially like the worship stuff. I have lots of kind of thoughts of exciting things that can happen with that. But societally, how do we respond to a changing culture that is going to be impacted by AI? And they're talking about it being, the next industrial revolution, but like on an exponential scale. So if that's the case, how are we prepared for that as a church? I think that would be my main concern.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's a really good point that I guess is hitting with me right now, where we can talk about how AI is used, but it's interesting for churches to think about, how do we speak to the underlying impact it'll have on individuals? Like, for example, the trust one you mentioned, I think is really good, where people start questioning trust. And then we as a church have to have like that at the forefront of, like, in a society where trust is hard, this is why the Bible speaks to it. This is what's important, and have those sort of things, brushed up on or at the forefront of churches around the world.
Yeah, that's really, the bulk of my writing at this Church and AI kind of Substack has really been, let's have those conversations, because I have enough of an understanding of AI to converse, but when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, I'm out. But I can talk about, okay, what does this mean? And I think that those are the questions that lots of people can engage with, even if they don't have a complex understanding of neural networks or convolutional neural networks or whatever. I don't get that stuff, but I do understand people.
Yeah, and because it's so unpredictable where this goes, like, you have these people writing these books on what the future could look like, but it's really hard. And yet we can learn from history, right? So one of Kranzberg's laws of technology is like, the history of technology is the most important history when assessing this kind of these kind of questions. It was really helpful when we talked to Jake Meter, and he was like, yeah, on one hand, he said, I don't believe the futurists who say the world is going to, require the universal basic. He didn't talk about UBI, but he was talking about like getting rid of the poor. It's like, is this really what's going to happen? It's like the promises of industrial revolution did not succeed, right? And yet also he recognized that the industrial revolution did lead to a lot of alleviation of poverty, that we can't just rewind the clock back to the agricultural technology of 100 years ago. Here we are today. Anyways, I just think about the history. So social media, one example. We didn't know what was going on, and yet what did it do? Okay, it created more anxiety because though we like connecting with other people, fun, good, connecting with other people. Paul wrote letters. Why don't we just not automate letters, but let's digitize letters and have more interactions. This is good, but it created more anxiety because when there's people in your face all the time, it's not actually healthy for you. As just one example, that anxiety vector. And then the societal one too, like the Industrial Revolution, or like think about churches 200 years ago being like, okay, a car is, how people get around on horses? The car is coming. So people are going to be fragmented, and they are going to get to choose churches. Churches will be democratized, so to speak. It will no longer be the local parish and local community. On my way to church that I'm part of right now, I think I pass maybe 6 or 7 churches just on the actual road that I drive on. And my church is only a 12-minute drive away. So these factors, like, you look at the history, you see the things, the delocalization, the increase of anxiety. Joel referenced the lack of trust. Like, we see these pieces, and then it's like, wait a second, this is huge. These problems are massive. Like, how do we create trust? Non-anxious presence? How do we create local communities? Like, my mind starts to go to countermeasures, and that's where my mind goes. It's like, let's think about this and be super practical. Okay, here's the potential. Therefore, what do we need now? Is that a good way to think about this? Like we theorize, we look at the history, we guess, and then our podcast's job is to tell people, here's how to live in light of that. Am I thinking about this correctly?
Yeah, I think you're right on the mark there, Andrew. There's an analogy to what you just talked about in family and marriage counseling that I think is actually really, really important for the church to kind of internalize and for Christians to internalize. Is when you're dealing with in-laws or family expectations outside your immediate family, it can be very stressful if your in-laws or other family want to try to uproot your life to bring you with them wherever they want to go. And one of the things you have to decide very early on in marriage is that, okay, we're here. You can go and you can spiral off and you can go do whatever you want, over there, but we're going to be right here. And if you want to come here and if you want to be with us, we will be here. But we're not going to go spiral out with you just because you'll be upset at us if we don't spiral out with you. And so I think if we're going to want to tell the world these things are problems, we have to kind of resolve that, like, whatever the rest of the broader world does in terms of spiraling out and not asking these underlying questions or playing into these things that make their lives worse or more destructive, individual Christians in the church have to decide, we're going to be here. This is how we're going to run our lives. This is how we are going to live based on our convictions and do so in a community. And y'all can be all the way off doing that, but we're going to be here. We're not going to go along with all of this just because you'll be mad at us if we don't. And if we're not willing to start there, if we're not willing to put the foot down and say, no, regardless of what happens everywhere else, this is how we're going to live, we will be dragged along. We will be brought along and we'll be caught into all of the destruction that spiraling out with the rest of the world does.
Yeah. And I think this is the feeling I think a lot of us have is like, okay, we see these things, we have this impulse almost to retract. And it's like, what we really need is a wisdom of like, we're not necessarily saying that we're going to exist in the society where we cut out technology. We're not like full Luddite, right? But we're going to apply wisdom to say, we know these are the negative implications of these things. And we've like really took the time to think about it. One of the challenges is at the pace it's moving, it's hard to create the time to think about it and to really fully absorb what's going to happen. So I think, yeah, we really have to do our best to be, in the world and not of the world, and like apply biblical wisdom to know what that really means.
Yeah. I think we often can go to two extremes. We either dive in, head first and don't look at what's coming, or we stick our heads in the sand like ostriches and hope for the best. And I kind of mentioned before this, we started recording, I'm passionate about being semi-Luddites. I think I don't think it works to be all the way in either camp. I think the issue is that it's like, we talk about being progressive or conservative. It's a ridiculous thing. Progressive values are ridiculous because you kind of assume that you're going up and to the right. Well, actually, there's about 1 million different things that are going, and some things have come down and some things have gone up. And so to just say that we're going up and to the right just doesn't work. And I think it's the same with AI. In some ways, tremendously helpful. And it's naive of us to, just hide away from it. The reality is this stuff is coming. And as much as we can rage against the machine, there's still going to be stuff that comes, right? There's still going to be impacts from AI that we will have to navigate. However, there are still things that we can be really concerned about. And as we talked about some of those things, relationship and some of those challenges as a church. And that's where it's good for us to pull back and go, okay, what is the church? What's the church's calling? What is the Bible calling us to as God's people? That's a question that we have to address. And it's good to do that now as a preemptive thing rather than a reactive thing. And I think that's the big danger at the moment is I think we're just not thinking about it until suddenly we have to. And there's going to be a real challenge to try and wrestle with something that is gathering a pace that we can't keep up with.
I love the distinction between the up and to the right. Like, I think that's actually the root of some of the conversations around AI in the future is a fundamental belief that technology will make things better, or that it will make things worse. Like, some people have an answer to that question, and that it informs everything else. Like every other statement about whether or not we should pause AGI or pause AI developments and all this kind of stuff. Like, I feel like I've felt this with Joel in our friendship, that I think, Joel, to call you out, you fundamentally believe in your heart, the more technology, the better. True or false?
Mostly true. I mean, I think if I weighed it on a whole, I would say technology does more for us than it takes away from us. Not that it's like purely good, but just like if I had to weigh it, I would say, yeah, I'm pro technology.
And I think one of the reasons why you say that is because you have good phone habits. You decrease your notifications. You're not on social media for the most part. Like, you told me, oh, I should be on Twitter more. And I'm like, dude, no, you're succeeding in life. You prioritize working hard on your job, caring for your family. I've seen you with your kids. You play with your kids. Like I actually think part of it is like, you've formed yourself. And because you work on the technology, you see yourself almost in an instrumentalist approach to tech of, you can do with tech what you want. That's what you do in your job. Every day you tell technology what to do. You subdue it and rule it as God taught Adam and Eve to do, right? But for most people, they don't day in and day out tell tech what to do.
Yeah.
They have a posture of an AI already on Facebook. You can't have a non-AI filter. You can't on Instagram have a non-AI approach to Instagram. On Twitter, you still can, and on Threads, you can. But like, fundamentally, people are seeing these developments and they feel out of control. They don't feel like it's an instrument that they can manipulate or a tool they can tell what to do. They do not feel like they can subdue the earth. And so it goes back to this question of like, do you see technology in going one direction? Do you see it going in the other? Do you see it helping? Do you see it fundamentally hurting? And obviously it's both, but it's just like I want to give people some sense of ownership over their lives. I want to give them this sense of responsibility. And I think sometimes what we do day to day influences our perspective on that fundamental question.
This is where like the Old Testament in particular is just really underrated in helping us navigate those questions, because the bulk of the Old Testament story takes place in a country where people are being dragged there against their will, whether it is Egypt or whether it is Babylon. You have the people of God who often find themselves in places that they do not want to be in. They didn't ask to be here. They didn't choose to be here, but circumstances are, this is just the world they live in. What you do in that world is still up to you. Like, what you do living in Babylon, you still have agency there. You still have the ability to choose. You can and you should say, all of these things are bad and terrible evil. We have examples of that in Daniel and Esther, who were very high-ranking officials in the Babylonian and Persian government, and yet still criticized those governments from within. But Daniel and Esther as examples again, their position, or the fact that this was the world they lived in, they didn't abandon themselves to the tide. They didn't abandon themselves to just doing whatever came their way. They recognized, this is the world I live in. It's a very dangerous and scary and hostile world, but I still have agency to live under these circumstances in a way that is wise and glorifying to God. And God will give me strength to do that.
Yeah. And I think that really, even that analogy on the Old Testament touches with me, where there are people like Joseph who, is in this world, and he goes into all of this like sinful environment, but God still uses him to lead this foreign kingdom, right? And like prepare for the 7 years of drought. And it's like, that's where I'm like, okay, there are a few people who will be in a like leadership role in technology in this world. And like, you need to kind of like lean into that. If that is what like you're being pulled into. But if not, you need to be aware to be like, hey, no, I'm not Joseph, right? Like, I'm one of the brothers or something like that. I'm Benjamin, right?
Mm-hmm. And not everyone responds in the same way. I mean, to go back to the Babylonian exile, not everyone is a Daniel. Some people are going to be more like Ezekiel. They're going to feel they're going to experience probably the most extreme consequences of the exile, down with the poorest of the poor of the exiles by the Jabar Canal. Some people are going to be like Jeremiah, who are going to be living in the ruins of a destroyed city. The body of Christ is big enough to where not only will our responses to AI or these other questions be different, but so will our experiences. And so we should recognize like the big picture of what's going on. We'll recognize that, hey, God maybe has sent you to a different place or has given you a different set of experiences that might change the way that you address this. But you have to be wise and discerning to know, okay, based on those things, how then do I live?
Yeah.
Well, to take it into the New Testament, I think the passage that's been on my mind is Jesus' parable of the wise builder. You know, if you think all these sands are changing, storms are coming, and all of that stuff is happening, you think, well, where are we building our house? You know, if it's built on the rock, then we have this kind of timeless advice and guidance from God to help us navigate whatever AI brings. So there's nothing here that will surprise God and think, I had all these great plans, but now, you know, that's not going to happen. So I think if we focus on building our house on the rock now, and that's kind of that point of looking back, I think, like, you know, I think the Old Testament analogies that you brought up are so pertinent, especially Joseph Joel, that one, I literally just preached on that last weekend. And so it's very much on my mind about how God has used what was intended for evil for good. And yeah, I think if we have our houses built on the rock, that's such a good thing. I think with Joseph, in everything he did, he was quick to give the glory to God. When he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, when he came before his brothers, he was quick to say, this isn't me. It's not my strength. It's not my abilities. It's God. And so in those settings, when some horrible things were happening and some challenging things were happening in the world, he was able to go, no, I'm where God wants me to be, doing what God wants me to do. And I can trust him to turn those trials into triumphs ultimately, which is the encouragement we could take from him.
Amen.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think about building our houses on rock, you know, the shifting sands of AI algorithms. Even like just before we jumped on, I was like, the number of views on YouTube for our last 2 episodes was lower. And it's like, well, it's the YouTube algorithm. Like, I can't control that algorithm. Whereas a podcast app more consistently delivers what you subscribe to on a podcast app. By the way, subscribe on YouTube, and got to throw that in because that's your part. That's participating in ruling the earth, telling the algorithms what to do. You should actually like and comment on the things you like and comment to force the algorithms to teach them and train your algorithms to get you the content that you want. So if you made it this far, you better do that. But so thinking about, I'm going to work off Jesus's analogy of building a house on the sand. Sometimes winds come from different directions. And so you build maybe a wall in one direction in a certain way to protect the house because of the winds coming from that direction. You know the winds are coming. What are the winds that are coming from AI in the future? Like thinking about future winds, we're trying to predict where the wind is coming from. We're trying to look at the weather forecast. You guys have read, Dave, you've read books on AI. Joel, you're in it. You're following the trends. With what the future is coming, where should we go? I know, Dave, you've talked about being an adaptable church. You have some like principles of what we should be thinking about. What are the winds and how should we respond?
I mean, I'll mention one wind, and I think it's been mentioned before, is that it'll affect industry. It'll affect some jobs more than others. So most people here work for a living, right? To provide for their family and stuff like that. So I think people do have to be aware there will be not to use the word disruption, but there will be a change in a lot of fields, and that people do have to be adaptable. I think that that word adaptability is going to be really important. And it's like, how do we help and empower people to be adaptable? So that's one wind for sure. That's at top of my mind.
Yeah, I think one of the other areas would be relationship. I know I've mentioned this a few times, but again, it's very pertinent to me at the moment that we are more digitally connected but less socially connected than we've ever been, and I just don't see how AI is going to improve that. I don't think that's going to make things better. I'm concerned about particularly our young people, especially the ones who went through COVID and who have come out the other side during those teenage years. That was a real formative time for them, and it was a struggle. And I see AI. I see things like there's Karen AI. I don't know if you came across that, but there's 20,000 people signed up to this social media influencer to pay $1 a minute just to talk to this false AI. And I think we're going to see things. I was reflecting on this recently. I'm pretty sure we're going to see things like mega church pastors finding excuses to use chatbot versions of themselves to, quote unquote, pastor their congregations, which just makes me cringe. But I think we're going to see those kinds of things. And in that world, I think we really have to be ready to prioritize those relationships, because I think as those winds come, as those storms come, the best wall we can build is by fostering genuine, meaningful connection, authentic connection with people, and finding a way to navigate. Because I think this relational deficit is gonna get found out at some point, and I think we're gonna have a huge swath of society saying, "Well, hang on, I don't want to do my life online with possibly AI." Connections. I don't want that. There was someone who married an AI this year, which is just, I think, pure propaganda, to be honest. But
probably propaganda, honestly. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. But even so, it's ridiculous. But I think what we're going to find is more and more people saying, what I need is real relationship. Well, there is nowhere like the church when it's functioning well that can have that kind of relationship. There's no way you can have those kind of meaningful connections outside of a church in the fullness of its calling. And so I think that's somewhere where we can really put a lot of attention in. I think a lot of, this last season, if you like, of church life has been all about entertainment and drawing people in on entertainment and then sharing the gospel. I think what we're going to see now is drawing people in on authentic, meaningful connections and then being able to share the gospel, which actually, funnily enough, was my story as a 19-year-old. That's how I got drawn into the church, was through meaningful connection.
Cool. I see two wins that are like they have some overlap with each other. To go on Dave's point with impact on teenagers in particular, we're about to see even more floodgates open on the potential for pornography and sexual violence through the internet. I saw a tweet last night of it's not a revolutionary technique in and of itself. It's just being applied to AI that makes it so potent. Of a still photograph of a person being laid over a model, and that model causing that person to move in a very compelling, very, very convincing way. Not really revolutionary from a VFX standpoint, but when applied at scale and when applied using the potentials of what AI can do. Now suddenly you have a pipeline for producing the most horrible pornography using any person that you would want to use for that. So we have a major, as if the pornography problem in the church wasn't already a serious problem enough as is. It's only about to explode. And then a parallel, not pornography, but has a lot of overlap to it, is we will start to see more and more just nonsense come through even trusted and reputable and established sources of media. There was a story that Futurism broke just last week where Sports Illustrated was caught publishing articles by fake AI-generated writers. And when they confronted Sports Illustrated about it, they pulled all of them. Now, they saved the receipts, and the receipts are pretty shocking. But here's a legacy publication like Sports Illustrated, who's been caught creating fake personas, like fake faces, fake bios, publishing just nonsense fake content. And it's one thing when like a fringe weird news website does that. It's one thing when a less reputable source does it. But when that kind of misbehavior starts creeping into sources that have been around well before the internet, have our cultural touchstones, like something like Sports Illustrated, then now you have just a hyperinflation of information that is just very difficult and hard to trust. Both of those wins, I think, have some overlap in that a lot of the mechanisms that propel both of those forward have some similarities, but the impacts will obviously be felt very differently. They're both pretty concerning.
Yeah, I would just I know we're running tight here, but I just want to speak one thing of hope, and this, Andrew, speaks to kind of your point of view on me being like a pro tech person, where I'm like, the technologist is hearing this and saying these are valid concerns, and I'm thinking, well, how do we create something where every image has a mark that says, like, is this AI generated or is this true, right? And you have to do it in a way where someone isn't going to Photoshop the image, but it's actually like a cryptographic chain where it's like a mathematical formula that like can't be faked. And it's like someone has to develop that technology and have to like make this company that everyone says, oh, this is the mark of authenticity that you can apply to your product, so that everyone knows, like, hey, this is AI generated, this is not, and it has this mark to prove it. I just want to say to people who are in positions that they can kind of go down these paths of like, hey, I'm going to build these things, I'm going to lean in, I'm going to help create a world in this AI environment where it holds some ideals of the Bible of truth and love. It's like, you know, be encouraged to connect with people, have these conversations, and take a leadership role.
Yeah. No, that's
Can I
good,
just add one thing before we finish it? Because I know that I feel like it's been a bit of doom mongering around AI, probably more than I would like. But I think, let me give you one example of where it could be really profound is, translation. So, think of all these multicultural churches where you have separate services for, your Chinese congregation and a different congregation or whatever. You could very realistically, in a very short period of time, have instant translation and have everyone in one building. It's conceivable that we could have a Bible in every possible language by the end of this generation. So we need to, again, balance. Along with Joel, have a bit of optimism and say that actually there are some really profound things that could happen in light of AI with the right foundations in place.
Yeah, and that's where, like, you think about putting AI in different categories compared to history. One comparison is social media. And so there's the Undivided Attention podcast with the creators of The Social Dilemma. And then they came out with the AI Dilemma. And they're very much making that comparison. Like, the problems of social media are going to be accelerated by AI. And I think they make some good points, Tristan Harris and others. But you could also compare AI to the printing press in some ways. In the proliferation of content, the proliferation of, all sorts of tools. AI is in some ways a platform or an accelerant of other things. And so, it can make translation faster. It can make in audio form and written form. And so there is potential there. And that's why we shouldn't just look at AI and say, oh, is it positive or negative? Or look at it and say, it's neutral. It's only how you use it. Like, it's going to shape us. It's going to cause errors, but we need to be working in it, and we need to be guiding it, and we need to be educated on it, at least to some degree. We don't need to read every single article written on AI. Do not feel the burden of being up to date on every single piece of information. But to be up to date enough that you know how to live in light of our world. We are supposed to live in this world. AI is part of it. Social media is part of it. We need to be honest about what's going on and to see the good in it. And I think that's one of the things that Christianity has historically done well, is recognizing the good of the city, the good of the fallen world, and pointing out that points to God. So any other closing comments of hope for our listeners, or closing comments in any direction? Because I feel like when there's four of us, it's like, oh, I'm thinking about this. Maybe I'll add this point. So this is your last chance with the last 3-4 minutes.
All right. The one comment, Andrew, you mentioned on the printing press, and I recently read a book on how innovation works, but I did not know that actually when the printing press came out, the Muslim Caliphate actually banned it. And they said, hey, this is going to create all the ideologies that we don't want. Let's go to this protectionist thing. And what was interesting, and you mentioned, is the Christian world has had a good track record of actually saying, hey, this is a new technology. It could be scary what it will do. And let's like look at how to accelerate the positives and like use it in a nuanced way. So that is encouraging to me. And yeah, if you look deep enough, you'll see it's happened a lot in the past too.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think to Joel's point that yes, AI is definitely new and very scary, but none of this is happening apart from the good oversight of God and his providence. He is not threatened by this. He is not going to be thrown off kilter by this. We have not created something that has succeeded in stripping him of his power or his authority or his influence. He is still sovereign over both the means and the ends, including the means and ends of AI. And we have not succeeded in building Babel. We have yet to succeed in doing that, which means that God is still on his throne, ruling and reigning over all things. And if he is good, that means that anything that he does is good, including whatever happens in our world pertaining to AI.
Dave, final word?
I think I'd echo exactly what was said. I think we can step forward into this world of AI cautiously optimistic, looking carefully at what's happening, but ultimately our foundation has to come in our faith. Our perspective of God is what determines everything else. If God is big enough, then our concerns will not override us. We're not going to stop sleeping at night because we know that God is on his throne. His sovereign power is still reigning and ruling over all things. And we are here to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to be kind of theologically engaging with some of this stuff, but always with that perspective that God is always going to win. Our ultimate challenge is to still continue to spread the gospel. So whether that's with AI or without AI, our Great Commission doesn't change. So we can kind of rest in that confidence as we push forward and not get overwrought with worry or concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good, guys. Yeah, there's so many directions we could have gone that feels like we're just scratching the surface. And yet I feel like this has been incredibly informative. So thank you guys for joining. And yeah, like I'll answer the question for myself, because for me, foundationally, there is this like cultural mandate. Yes. There is this work ethic. Yes. There is this lean in, Joel, that's kind of a phrase you use a lot of, like lean in to build tech. And all this is true. We do have what has been called a Protestant work ethic that's based in our theology. But we also have a Protestant rest ethic, if you will, that we find our rest not in our works, but in what Christ has done for us. And that takes our worry away, because if he can accomplish salvation for us and give us the new heavens and new earth, then yeah, he can accomplish a lot more than that. And so we work in light of what he has already done rather than for some uncertain future. Our future is secure in heaven. And so I take rest in that, and that it gives me confidence to lean in a different way. Thanks for listening. We encourage our listeners to use tech to find rest and to glorify God. That's why we exist. Thanks for listening along with us. You can follow along with both Austin and Dave as they continue to write, blog, and post different things. Who knows? Dave might come out with a book at some point. Who knows? So you can subscribe to his Substack, Church and AI. You can follow along with Austin. Literally follow the Gospel Coalition. You'll probably see his fingerprints here and there on different things. Any other place that they should keep up with you, Austin? Digital Babylon, is that a good spot?
Yeah, my Substack is Passing Through Digital Babylon, and while I'm not podcasting at the moment, you can listen to previous work I've done at the Breaking the Digital Spell podcast, which is available anywhere you get your podcasts.
Mm-hmm. It's a good series of episodes. I listened to it myself. I think your wife even read some quotes.
She does.
So that you had a different voice sometimes.
Yes,
yeah.
My wife has read every single quote. Some of them are quite long, but she has read every single one of them for me. It's been fun to have her do that.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I thought it was a warm, podcast. You have some warmth that you don't have in a written form, and there's some good in that. Even the tone of how we're talking about AI without having all this fear in our voice, like we can talk about it a different way. Anyways, thanks for listening. We're wrapping up the episode now. Under an hour. Thanks for listening. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.